Well, I'm Andrea again, and today we're going to talk about Moses. Now, it's not very often in the Bible that we get to know somebody from the time they were a baby until the time that they were an old man. But that's true of Moses. Remember, it was also true of Samuel that we learned about his baby story, and then we saw him all the way up to the time that he died. So, when Joseph brought his whole family down to Egypt, that was Jacob and his 12 sons and their families, they didn't know they would be staying there for 400 years. That's a long, long time. They had a land of their own where they were shepherds. It was called the land of Goshen. And by the time that we get to Moses' story, things have changed a lot. They have a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph, who did not respect the Israelite people as the people of God. And he put them to work making bricks. Well, you can imagine that making bricks is very different from being a shepherd. It's a lot less freedom, and they weren't treated well. They were treated like slaves. There were a couple people who were descended from Levi, who was one of Jacob's sons, and they were called Levites because they were descended from Levi. And Levi was, he had kind of a special role in salvation history because his descendants actually were supposed to take care of the temple. So just put that as a little piece of fact that you can remember next time that you need it. But this Pharaoh did not know Joseph, and he did not respect the Hebrew people, and he had a program to kill all the baby boys. He wanted the midwives who went to the women when they were in labor to help them with this project. But they were God-fearing women, and they would not do it. But one way or another, he was trying to kill all the baby boys. So Moses' parents were pretty smart, and they said, we're going to try to get around this. We're going to try to hide this baby down in the river. Miriam can watch him all day, and then she can help him if a little crocodile comes up or anything scary like that. So Miriam would hide in the tall grasses, and she would watch the baby. Now, how do you think they had a baby floating on the river without drowning? They had made a little basket boat, and the basket boat was covered with pitch, which is like tar, and that way it would float. So it was pretty ingenious. And she watched and watched, make sure no crocodiles or snakes would get to the baby. And then if he cried out there, probably nobody would hear him. But one day along came a princess, and the beautiful princess was the daughter of the Pharaoh who was killing all these baby boys. And she felt bad about that. She didn't think that should be happening. So she said, this must be one of the Hebrew babies that my father is trying to kill. She said, I'm going to adopt him. I'm going to name him Moses, which means I drew him out of the water. And she was a good, compassionate person. And so Miriam just knew that she could trust her. Miriam popped out of the tall grasses and said, would you like to have a Hebrew woman to nurse this baby? And so that's how the mother got involved in nursing her own baby who was living now in a palace. So imagine what Moses' life was like. He's living in a palace, but most of the people in his family are slaves. So he's feeling like back and forth. Where should I be? Should I be in the palace? Should I be with my family who is making bricks all day long? He was kind of conflicted about that. So he saw the forced labor, and one day he got so mad at the way his people were being treated that he killed an Egyptian. The next day he realized that someone had seen him kill the Egyptian, and he knew his life was not worth living if he stayed in Egypt. So he escaped to the desert of Midian. And it was close to a mountain near Mount Horeb, which is also called Mount Sinai, that he saw a burning bush. It wasn't exactly a burning bush. What it was a bush that had fire going through it, but the bush was not being burned up. So it wasn't really a burning bush. It was a bush. It was fire. They were both in the same place, but yet the bush was not being burned. So he looked a little closer. He wanted to go and see this thing. Some people say that maybe lots of bushes are burning, but we need to, when we see something that's different, we need to stop and pay attention. So as soon as he got near the burning bush, he heard a voice that said, "Take off your sandals, because where you are stepping right now is holy ground." So he did take off his sandals, and he bowed, and he knew that God was trying to talk to him. God said, "I have heard the cries and the affliction of my people in Egypt. I have not forgotten them, and I am sending you to bring them out of Egypt." Well, here Moses had barely gotten out of Egypt with his life. He knew he was talking to God, but he didn't really want to say yes to what God was asking. He said, "Well, I have some problems with what you're asking me to do." And he tried to kind of reason with God. First of all, how will they know? Who will listen to me? Nobody's going to listen to me. And God said, "Didn't I make the tongue? Didn't I make the mouth? I can make you say the words that they will listen to." That didn't work. So then Moses said, "Well, I have a bit of a speech impediment. It's kind of hard for me to get the words out that I want. And I don't think you want to send me, because maybe if you had someone that could speak a lot better than me." And God said, "Sure. How about your brother, Aaron? Aaron knows how to speak well." That didn't work either. So Moses finally said, "I just don't want to do it, and I think you should send somebody else." So God said, "No, I'm sending you. I'm sending you." And when God says he's sending you somewhere, then you're going. You're either going or you're going to say no. And Moses tried saying, "I'm slow of speech, people won't listen." And he finally said, "Well, all right, when I go to Egypt, I'm going to Egypt, then who shall I say has sent me?" And God said, "Say, I am who I am." So Moses now had a name for God, which is a very special name. We don't pronounce that name very often. So he did go down to Egypt. He took his life in his hands, went down to Egypt, and started to talk to Pharaoh. Pharaoh wouldn't listen to him. He had a rod that he could throw, and it would become a snake. All the magicians could do that. They say, "We can throw a rod and make it into a snake. We can take a snake by the tail and make it back into a rod. We can do all that. Cheap magic is not going to do anything to us." And so we knew that Pharaoh wouldn't listen. And all he was asking was for them to be able to go sacrifice in a special place. But what they really wanted to do was escape from Egypt and escape from the slavery there. And Pharaoh knew that. So making a long story short, there were 10 plagues that plagued Egypt. And when you think of a country that's been through just about all the bad things you can even imagine, that's exactly what happened to Egypt. Number 1, the water in the Nile turned into blood. Plague number 2, the country was overrun by frogs. Number 3, there were gnats, little tiny buzzy creatures that just buzzed through the air and drive everybody completely crazy. Number 4 was flies. There were flies all over their food, flies all over their cattle. Number 5, that was number 4. Number 5, the animals started to die off. Number 6, the people started to have boils on their skin. Number 7, a terrible storm of hail. Plague number 8, locusts that ate everything that the gnats had left behind. 9, darkness, a darkness that fell over the land, a darkness that could be felt. And number 10, which is the saddest part, destruction of the firstborn, all through the land of Egypt. Now we come to the Passover. Passover means passed over. The angel of death passed over the houses of the Hebrews, and so that their firstborn did not die. The Passover how did the angel know which houses belonged to the Hebrews? Well, it was a certain sign. They were each going to have a sheep or a goat that they would eat for the Passover. And they would take some of the blood of the sheep and the goat and put it on the lintels of the house and the doorframe of the house. And the angel of death passed over. So after that, Pharaoh did decide to let the people go. You know that old saying, let my people go? Well, Pharaoh decided he would finally let the people go. And his advisors were saying, there's nothing left of this country. You need to let these people go. So they got close to the Red Sea. And as soon as they got close, they heard rumbling behind them, brum, 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 chariots drawn by horses. And Pharaoh had changed his mind again, and he was going to race after those Hebrews, and he was going to make them come back and make bricks. Who was going to make all those bricks if it wasn't the Hebrews? So God said to Moses, hold up your staff, and the waters are going to part. So the waters went to the south and the north, and they parted, and the Israelites crossed through on dry land. Pretty amazing. And then they were off in the wilderness. They had left the Egyptians behind. When the water crossed back over, poured back over, the whole Egyptian army was completely crushed and drowned. So they started going to the promised land. Took them a long time to get there, and I'll tell you why. That's because they did so much complaining. The God got tired of the complaining. And he gave them food to eat. It was called manna, that was like little pieces of cotton, but it was edible cotton that was on the ground. That was their kind of like their carbohydrates. And he caused quail to fly into the encampment, and they had all the quail they wanted to eat, but they still complained. Oh, we wish we could go back to Egypt. Why did you bring us out here to die? And sometimes there wasn't enough water. So God said, strike the rock and water will come out. And so they did that. So after Moses struck the rock, something wonderful happened. God decided to give his 10 commandments to his people. And Moses was able to go up the mountain, and God wrote the 10 commandments with his own heavenly finger into the rock. And God gave those 2 tablets of 10 commandments to Moses to take down to the people. And he did that. He even got to see the glory of God, which he thought, well, if I see the glory of God, I will not be able to live after that. But God let him live, even after having seen the glory of God. So he came down the mountain with the 10 commandments, and suddenly he heard a funny sound. It was the sound of music and dancing and shouting. What was that all about? Turns out that the people had asked Aaron, the older brother, to make them a golden calf so they could dance around the golden calf and pretend that the golden calf had brought them out of Egypt. Well, something more is going to happen, and I'm happy to say I hear my timer go off. So that means the next time we talk about Moses, we can not only talk about Moses, but we'll have time to talk about Joshua. So we're going to talk about Moses and Joshua the next time. But let's leave these people with their golden calf and see what happened to them when they disobeyed God and pretended that a golden calf had brought them out of Egypt. So I'm glad you're here today, and I'll see you next time, and we'll catch up with Moses and Joshua. Thank you for joining me.